All right, well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of our Think and Disrupt series, sponsored by the Response Marketing Association. So a big thank you to the RMA. And the RMA, a very important advocacy group for young marketers coming through the system, really focused on education, advocacy, and networking. And so just a special thank you to the RMA for putting this together. And I'm so excited on this current topic, near and dear to my heart. I'm with a fellow board member of mine, Derek Lackey, who's the managing director of Newport Thompson. He'll introduce himself in just a moment. And today we're going to talk about, and I like to call Derek as Dr. Data in a lot of ways. We're going to talk about data and protection, specifically as it relates to Bill C-11 and the implications on organizations and companies in terms of what they need to do and prepare themselves for the future. And so Derek, welcome. It's so amazing to have you. And maybe you can just take a minute just to talk a little bit about yourself and your experience in data and protection.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I've been the president. I've served your role in the Direct Marketing Association for about 11 years, and we have transformed into the Response Marketing Association. And I've had the pleasure during that time of coming at privacy and data protection from a marketer's point of view. So I'm not a policy geek. I'm not a lawyer. And the privacy industry seems to be full of policy geeks and lawyers. So I'm kind of an odd bird in the privacy sector in that I see privacy through the filter of a marketer. And I think that that's probably a practical or pragmatic point of view on privacy. In terms of my qualifications, I'm a CIPM with the IAPP, which simply means I know how to implement a privacy management program within a company or an organization. I also am on the IAPP KnowledgeNet Committee for Toronto. I'm a co-chair. I'm in my second year of that commitment. And that simply means that we put on events for the IAPP throughout the year. I'm on the ISO 31700 Privacy by Design for Consumer Products Committee, which is a global committee. I'm one of 10 Canadians on that committee, and we are actually writing the ISO standard for privacy by design for consumer products.
Very cool.
Yeah, I've been on a few committees. I chaired the work group on guidance for the Standard Council of Canada's Advisory Council on GDPR, and we wrote a pretty comprehensive paper for Canadian businesses who are doing business in Europe and what to watch for. So if anybody's interested in that, I'm happy to send you that document or lead you to the link on that. So suffice to say, I've really buried myself in, my initial interest was Castle, but it very quickly spread to the GDPR in the EU and the California Privacy Protection Act, which has now been enforced for a couple of years in California and is about to be transformed again by the CCPA. So there's lots of alphabet soup going on in this space, and as a marketer, I just think it's responsible that we kind of plug in early on this, because it's the new Canadian law that's going to replace PIPEDA is going to seriously affect how we communicate and what we can and can't do with data. I won't get ahead of myself, but that's kind of the context of this conversation today, is to just look at how you might start preparing. The law isn't the law yet, Lauren. It's in second reading and at the moment in Parliament, and it's quite frankly, I listened to. They had an hour of second reading last Friday, and I listened to the whole hour and the questions, and I mean, the political scene at the moment is horrible, because there wasn't a person in the House of Commons, in my opinion, who was prepared for that hour discussion in a meaningful way. Like getting at the issues of the law, nobody was prepared. They were just accusing each other of the Conservatives accused the Liberals of trying to distract the Ethics Committee from the WE investigation by loading them with another bill.
It's all
The
cameras,
natural,
yeah.
it really
Let's
is.
start at the beginning, maybe. Let's, just for marketers and for those that are tuning in, as you know, it's incredibly confusing as it relates to data and protection. There's a whole zealot movement around consumers taking more control of their data, zero-party data, being more responsible. There's fines. We're hearing about GDPR, the crazy fines all over the world. If we start at the very beginning on Bill C-11, can you tell us what exactly it is, and what are the implications for marketers overall at a very high level? But really starting for what it is and what it covers.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it really involves two things. It's the CPPA, which is the new Canadian privacy protection law. So its primary purpose, I think, was designed to protect Canadian citizens. So if you go back to the digital charter, I actually have it here.
Well, the Digital Charter Implementation Act.
Yeah, it started last May with the government introducing Canada's digital charter, which was supposed to bring trust in a digital world, and it consisted of 10 points: universal access, safety and security, control and consent, transparency, portability and interoperability, open and modern digital government, a level playing field, data digital for good, strong democracy, free from hate and violent extremism, and strong enforcement and real accountability. So those are the 10 principles of the Canada's digital charter. And what this CPPA law is designed to do is transform PIPEDA, our current privacy laws that really are very poorly enforced. They're kind of a set of best practices that the Privacy Commission has Commissioner of Canada has put forth.
Oh, with no teeth, eh, Derek? Like there's really no teeth behind it.
There really isn't. It's so tough, Lauren, to enforce PIPEDA. It's the tools at the Privacy Commissioner's when he does find a breach, like the big Equifax one.
Oh, yeah.
They don't have the tools to find it. By the time they take them to court, it's like a 4 to 8 year process, and it's expensive and it's cumbersome. And so there's been a lot of pressure on the government for the entire term that the government's been in. There's been pressure to update PIPEDA and really protect Canadian citizens. I won't get ahead of myself, but I think that in the eagerness to protect business at the same time, our government may have, not done themselves any favors.
So Derek, if you think of PIPEDA as the baseline, is the bill, like Bill C-11, is it an enhancement over PIPEDA? Like for everybody, what's the difference between what we have today and what's being proposed in Bill C-11?
Yeah, they've gone all the way in this new bill. So there's two parts to the new bill. There's the CPPA and there's the Tribunal Act. And the Tribunal Act is the enforcement side of it. So we'll get into that. But many of the foundational principles of PIPEDA have been brought forward into this new law. So it's not like we're changing wholesale. We're just trimming around the edges and trying to box it in a little bit better. But unfortunately, we got into this balanced approach, and I'll make this point right up front. The GDPR was written to protect EU citizens, period, stop and sentence. And Canada didn't take that approach. So fundamentally, Canada has not made the statement that privacy is an inalienable right the way the EU has. The EU has said it's every citizen has a right to privacy, and Canada hasn't gone that far. They stopped short of that because they also have the position that every company has the right to use your data.
Yeah.
Right. So they've called this a balanced approach, and I think they're trying to serve two masters, and they've ended up with a really crappy bill as a result of it. because you can, I don't think in this case you can serve two masters. We've taken advantage as a business community of people's personal data the last 20 years. I don't think anybody would not nod their head looking at that and going, yeah, that's a pretty accurate statement. And we have to stop. So these new laws are designed to make us stop. So how do you write a law that is a balanced approach, protecting the business community from any inconvenience and protecting the privacy of your Canadian citizens? I think they're in, like, I like Anne Kavukian's zero sum, don't play a zero sum game. But I think in this case, those are opposite polars. And I think it's really why the bill is, in my point of view, as poorly designed as it is.
You know what? It's unfortunate. So you think of a world of collaboration, right? Where, you want businesses to actually build a win-win situation. You want businesses and consumers to win together. It should be in the best interests of businesses that are forward-thinking to really want to protect their members' data, in a lot of ways.
Lauren, at what point did we have to be legislated to take care of our customer? Right? It is kind of mind-boggling. Yeah, I know.
So from my perspective, though, it's interesting. I think, and this is what's interesting with Bill C-11 right now. Like when you think about it's a double-edged sword in the sense that consumers have to embrace the fact that they need to own their own data and they need to manage their own data and they need to care about their own data. And some of the more recent breaches on Facebook and other very well-known platforms, I think, have magnified the issue of why consumers need to care. And then on the other side of the fence, I think businesses, especially coming through what we've done with COVID-19, where millennials, Gen Ys, even Gen X cuspers, Gen Z, they're all really caring about businesses that really care about things other than just the bottom line. And so it feels like it's the perfect storm now, where if we can get this right, and to your point, maybe what happened with the EU and GDPR, maybe is that too extreme? I don't know. I'd be interested on your perspective on that. But what do you think is the right tension point moving forward? Like if you were king for a day and you were setting this up, how would you pivot from PIPEDA into C-11 or make the adjustments to C-11 so that it actually works for businesses and works for consumers?
Yeah, great question. So for me, if you look at GDPR, the fundamental cornerstone of the GDPR is that you need a lawful basis to process data. Okay, there's 6 of them to choose from. 3 are designed for the government and institutions, and 3 are designed for private companies. And it's pretty simple. Consent is one. Everybody thinks the GDPR is a consent regime, and it's not. It's not. Consent is one lawful basis of processing. Contractual is a second one. So they're a customer or you have some kind of working agreement. And then third is what's called legitimate interest. And 90%, maybe more, of all direct marketing in the EU, it falls under the legitimate interest. It's in the legitimate interest of the company to send you emails or process your data in a responsible way, right? So legitimate interest is a test that you have to go through. And I would have expected the Canadian government, that was such a well-designed framework for a privacy law. Because if you rely on consent, it's hard to get, Lauren, especially in a society like we've been living in where we don't trust any, like I think the privacy commissioner said that 27% of the Canadians trust brands with their data. Like, gosh, that's scary. So we have to come back out of this. It's going to take 10 years, I think, till we start to trust people with our data and know what they're going to do, and like no tricks and nothing up my sleeve. Because right now, when you give your data out, it's nothing but something up my sleeve. It's like you don't know what people are doing with it. Why does Tim Hortons need to know where I vacation? You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely. And the
it's
consumers
like,
are on guard. I think you're absolutely right. Until the
I,
trust is actually reestablished, it's going to be a very difficult uphill battle, no question.
yeah. And part of my concern with the CPPA is they didn't use that lawful basis of processing structure. They just said you need consent to process a person's data, and then they proceeded to give 33 exemptions to it, which, you know, if
And why
Lauren,
bother?
yeah, if you're Facebook's lawyers, you're going to delve through those 33 exceptions,
Totally.
and you're going to make a case. Like one of the exceptions was if the public could reasonably expect you to do that. So if I'm a Facebook lawyer, nothing changes with
Yeah,
this law,
totally. I hear you.
because I'm gonna argue in court that it's reasonable that a customer knows that for their free Facebook account that they're going to use their data. So what's the problem? So, you know, in a society that's supposed to be protecting Canadians' data, personal data, uh, like it's mind-boggling what organizations like they have 500 and more touch points about Lauren Solway, right? They don't just take what they get from Facebook. They go out on the internet and look for and build a profile on you so they can sell advertising more effectively against it. And you know,
So Derek, this is
the
interesting.
whole ad world is coming to its knees because it was
Totally.
built on quicksand, and it's going to completely have to reinvent itself.
Totally. So if you
Yeah.
go back to your initial comment, and I think it was so prophetic, right? It felt like, my words, not yours, but for Bill C-11 is trying to serve too many masters.
Yes.
So what stage is it at now, and where do they go next? Like as far as the bill is concerned.
Yeah. So on a path, it's in its second reading. So it's had 2 sessions in the House of Commons for its second reading. The last one was on March 26th, and literally, Lauren, I read through the transcript of the whole hour and the questions, and nothing got resolved. But then the next move the Liberals would like to do is move it to the Ethics Committee, where it would go into public consultation, so that organizations like us could literally write our white paper of what specific changes we'd like to see in order to have it become the law. The Ethics Committee then recommends back to the Minister, ISCD Minister, Champagne, any changes, and it then goes back to the House and gets passed. So that's kind of the path of it. But many privacy professionals like myself, I don't see it passing in its current form. But what it is doing for us right now is it's pointing the way. It's pointing the kind of cornerstones that we might be considering if we're using people's data and we don't have a documented privacy management program. That's going to be a problem. So no matter which way this law passes in the next couple of years, it's going to require a privacy management system for all companies that use any kind of personal data. So in its extreme, a small hairdresser who keeps a client list is going to have a privacy management program because she keeps personal data of her clients. So, and there's no, you know, that's an important factor. The CCPA in California have put in a bar. They said that you need to really meet 3 criteria. Let me just get those. The 3 criteria were.
This was for the more recent California law, and is it more restrictive than GDPR overall?
No, definitely the GDPR is the most restrictive. You know, the California one has a few quirky little things, like you have to have a "Do Not Sell My Data" button, which is kind of interesting. The primary purpose of CCPA in California was to stop the massive sale and trading of your data. The CCPA goes the next level and puts more GDPR-like issues in play. So the combination of CPPA and CPRA as it starts to settle and the regulations get put in, it's going to look a lot like GDPR. But in California, there's an exclusion for small businesses. So if you're under $25 million, or if you keep 50,000 or less files of California residents, or 50% of your revenue is from selling data. So if you meet any one of those three criteria, the law applies. If you don't meet any one of those three criteria, and about half of my clients who inquire about CPPA, they're actually under the radar. They because they meet one of these three criteria of being under 25 million, having 50,000 or less files, and they don't earn 50% of the revenue from selling data. So we couldn't imagine a bill being proposed in Canada that was for every little business. So if you're a restaurant and you want to keep a client list, you have to have a privacy management program.
So Derek, so given the, I guess the word I'm looking for is the haziness around Bill C-11, and to your point, it's probably a long way away from actually 2 readings so far, probably go through a few more, pathway undefined. What would your advice be to marketers or businesses in terms of, like, what do they follow? Is it GDPR that they would follow right now? Do they follow our current PIPEDA that we have in Canada today? Is it California law? What should they be prepared for, given the fact that it's not well defined today, but it's going to get more restrictive in some sense?
Yeah, I would definitely go with the fundamental principles of the GDPR. They've set a new global standard for privacy and data protection in the world, and most countries' laws are a reflection of the GDPR. Like, it's been put in Brazil and Nigeria. Several countries have kind of adopted the GDPR and put a couple little local twists on it, but fundamentally, it's giving the rights back to the consumer and saying, you know, the data belongs to them, and in order for you to process it, you have to have consent, or at least a reasonable implied consent, and you have to provide rights, opt-out rights and change rights, and all the 8 rights that the GDPR. So I would start heading towards practices that comply with the GDPR, because by then you're just going to tweak around the edges when the CPPA gets passed and be fine. And it's amazing, Lauren, how much overlap there was between PIPEDA and the GDPR. Now, in my opinion, that PIPEDA was really well written back in 1999. It saw the future, and it saw what it had to do to protect Canadians, and it was a very good law at the time. And the only thing missing in it was enforcement. It's the difference between best practices and the law. And even though PIPEDA is the law, it's a relatively unenforced law. So the Privacy Commissioner's been screaming for the powers to investigate and fine, yeah. So we'll talk about enforcement, because that's a pretty key area. So.
Hey, so Derek, so just thinking back on Bill C-11, thanks for that. So in second reading right now, again, in your mind, would the perfect solution be PIPEDA as it exists today with some slight refinements, and then adding teeth to how it actually gets executed? Would that be the perfect mix, or do you think it's still a lot of the policies in PIPEDA need to be evolved anyway, and that should be contemplated in Bill C-11?
Yeah, I would suggest that or I would have thought that that's what they would have done. They would have taken the best of PIPEDA and just added what's needed to protect people online, and to force companies to minimize the data they collect, only collect what they need. And if you're going to collect it, you have to secure it. So little, like things like that we now know with technology and where we are today, and we know how data is being abused. There was some changes to PIPEDA that would have brought us in. Remember too, Lauren, that the one of the primary reasons for the government even acting is we have adequacy with the GDPR right now. But if we don't update our law, our adequacy could be in jeopardy. So that means all the free trade that goes on between the EU and Canada could be disrupted because data can't cross borders, and under the GDPR, there's a whole bunch of nuances. Canada left the whole crossing borders out of the law. So you can do whatever you want with a Canadian's data. You can ship it to the US where it's part of the Patriot Act or subject to the Patriot Act, and Canada has nothing to say about that, which was a shock.
Yeah,
that was a shock because a very key part of the GDPR is this cross-border permission. So yeah, it's interesting. I think the fundamental balanced approach is killing this law. This law should be written, in my opinion, Lauren, just like how do we protect Canadian citizens' data, and then look at how do we, make this less inconvenient for business. I agree that you can't pummel business. Lots of complaints on the GDPR that they really went too far, that it's been too difficult for particularly small business to implement. The GDPR has no limit like the California law. It applies to everybody. So if you're a two-man shop, you collect and use people's personal data,
I didn't
you
know
have
that.
to follow the law. Yep. Yeah. Wow. It's across the board. It gives no regard to size of the organization. It's saying everybody must obey the rights and privacy rights of the. Remember, it's rooted back in like a long history of like absolute craziness over privacy that has existed in Europe. So yeah, so I would suggest that we put the emphasis on the wrong syllable, I believe, and it should have just been written to protect citizens. Then we could figure out in the regulations and implementation how to make it a smooth transition for business. But really, businesses are doing collecting data that they're never using and not protecting it, and all that has to stop. So at the very least, we need to put privacy management programs in that mesh with like we use the NIST privacy framework, because there's a cybersecurity side to that same one. So the privacy and cybersecurity can work together. I like the NIST frameworks, and as a company, that's in Newport Thompson, we've developed our whole program on the NIST privacy framework.
Yeah, it makes sense. So question for you on Bill C-11, because I know you had mentioned to me specifically Section 15, which requires consent to be able for businesses to use consumers' data. How fair do you think that is to businesses? Like, is that reasonable for them to actually go out and ask for consent, notwithstanding the fact that consumers are very untrusting of what's happening with their data today? Maybe you can provide some context on that.
Well, the principles of the law of being more transparent and open and have purpose limitations on. So I'll give you an example. Facebook collected my phone number in order, and I'm quoting them, that if I'm ever locked out of my account, that it's via text and two-factor authorization through my phone number, that I could get access to my account. So that was the reason that they asked for my phone number. But you know what they're doing with it now? People are sending me text messages of posts off Facebook. I never consented for that, Lauren. That was never part of the deal. And if it was buried so deep in the privacy policy, which is thicker than Macbeth for Facebook, that I didn't know what I signed for. The great thing with the GDPR is if you don't know what you signed for, you didn't sign for it.
Yeah, I like that.
Right? I think that makes a lot of sense, because now it forces, like, they literally have asked companies to tier your privacy program, make 11 clear statements, and have drop down to explain each statement more clearly. But your policy is just 11 clear statements. Here's what we do with your data. Here's what we collect. Here's why we collect it.
Transparency, right?
Transparency, and a very distinct purpose limitation. If you're going to collect my phone number for reason X and I give it to you for reason X, don't think you can do whatever you want with it. And it just boggles my mind. So, it's basing the law strictly on consent is very difficult. We experienced it with Castle, and we're going to experience it with the CCPA. Having those multiple lawful bases for processing, I think, would have been a much more pragmatic approach that business would have understood. And it would have made it actually easier for businesses to collect the data they need to do business. And,
that's what's ironic, eh? Like that's the ironic part.
Exactly.
Of it. If it's laid out and it's clearer for consumers and for businesses, you're gonna have less people offside, and people will be happier overall, right?
Lauren, when I read Section 15, I went, oh. I remember the first time I read it, I went, oh.
Yeah.
But then I read Section 18 to 51, 33 exemptions.
That's crazy.
And I went like, oh my God, I can drive a truck through that Section 15 statement.
It's a lawyer's haven.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Let's talk. What about for those that are offside, and for as nebulous as it is right now, talk to us a little bit about the enforcement side and the teeth. You talked about PIPEDA. The initial really didn't have the teeth, or it wasn't really enforced. Do you expect through Bill C-11, when it becomes law, when and if it becomes law, there'll be a heavier emphasis and hand on enforcement? And do you think the monetary penalties will be similar to what GDPR has right now?
So yes and yes. I believe that the biggest change we're going to see is that whatever privacy law we have in place, it will have enforcement. The liberals like to use the word strong enforcement, and I'm not sure I can go that far. And I'll tell you why. So the main enforcement tool that they're proposing is to have a tribunal board. So the Office of the Privacy Commissioner federally will do the investigation. So lots of privacy professionals doing the investigation who understand all the issues and the elements and how people trick the system, and they know what to look for, in other words, right? Because they're privacy professionals.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
What concerns me is that the structure of the tribunal is proposed to be 3 to 6 people, only one of which, Lauren, has to have a privacy background. And these are going to be the 6 people who are going to decide whether or not to take the privacy commissioner's investigative recommendations and fine this company. So it just doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you get non-professionals judging professionals who really know their trade?
Yeah, I agree.
I look at the CRTC. They don't make recommendations on fines that are irresponsible. They respect the power they've been given under Castle, and they've done a pretty decent job of trying to explain what is offside and giving fines to make examples, and they've tried to do their job. But that leads me to the second part: is the government put a private right of action in the CCPA. That's a complete joke. So first off, you need to get through all your appeals with the Privacy Commissioner's Office on their findings. That could take a few years. Then, if the tribunal does fine you, you have to survive the appeals of that, which could take another few years. And only then can a private right of action be launched.
That's crazy.
And here it gets worse. The private right of action requires that you prove damages, which any lawyer today will tell you that bar, Lauren, is almost impossible to set. So somebody releases all my information on, gets breached, and I got no recourse under this law, because by the time I get to them, I'm gonna even forget about the breach by the time I go through all of that.
How would that be different in the EU right now with GDPR? Like, is the remedy and the fines, is it more like, is it pretty black and white?
It definitely is, and there are some private rights of action in extreme cases, like in mass cases, like Facebook. There are some private, but they're not as tort law oriented as the U.S. The U.S. is a great model for the private right of action, and it's very alive and well under CCPA, and I think, unfortunately, when we canceled it, indefinitely postponed it for Castle here in Canada, it completely took the enforcement teeth out of Castle. The businesses were truly afraid of the public coming after them. They got a better shot at winning a lottery than getting fined by the CRTC under Castle currently. There's only been 6 undertakings or notices of violations in the last since the private right of action was canceled 4 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. Because the CRTC, if you look back at what they did, they set themselves up to set these precedences. The early fines against Rogers and stuff, they set an example for what they're going to fine for, right? But always the private right of action was meant to be the primary enforcement tool, because businesses are truly afraid of the public, so they're going to behave. They're going to color inside the lines, right?
Yeah.
And I think the private right of action is a great tool, especially in an environment where you've got one regulator like we have in Canada. Under the GDPR, they have like 31 of them, 31 data protection supervisors. So each country has their own authority, and they control what's going on with the GDPR in their community, and they coordinate with each other. So they're trying to all sing off the same song sheet, but But in Europe, you could have 31 data protection authorities looking at you at least. Only one takes the lead in actually investigating and charging you, but they do it on behalf of all the others. So there's a much bigger enforcement body in the EU. So they would rely less on the private right of action than in a country like Canada, where we're only going to have one enforcement body.
So do you expect then, like, even if, let's say, Bill C-11 strengthens, it becomes a law, and it actually let's say it's well shaped, for lack of a better word, is it your expectation that from an enforcement standpoint and the fines that come with it, that it will be heavily enforced, or is it just going to be the same sort of thing, we're tiptoeing around it? And then I'd love your perspective on what's the size of the fines, like what for marketers and businesses, the urgency in terms of preparing themselves, like what's at risk from a fine standpoint?
Yeah, I would say what's at risk from a business point of view is your brand, because you made this statement earlier, and I think you're dead on. As the consumer, the great awakening is happening to the consumers of the value of their personal data. They're beginning to be more protective of it and be more aware, and they're becoming more aware of the brands who respect it and the ones who don't. And I think that the ones who don't that's going to be way more costly than the fines. But to answer your question, Canada did set the fines over the GDPR. So the max fine could be 5% of your global revenue, or 25 million in extreme cases.
Wow.
And that's per violation. So if you're guilty of a couple of, now we never see those kinds of fines. The biggest fine under Castle is 10 million. And in reality, they've got the ability to fine up to 10 million, but the reality is the biggest fine has been $250,000 to Rogers from the CRTC. Collectively, the competition commissioner used Castle to fine Avis, Budget, and the parent company $1 million each. So they went after them. They went after them the full 10 million each, 3 different companies, because they made an offer that you could never get, and they used email and text marketing to promote it, and you could never achieve that deal at the desk. So the privacy or the competition commissioner said, you know, I've got the ability under Castle to find them, and I'm going to find them to the max. And the CRTC board, enforcement board, decided to back that down to $1 million each. So the biggest fine we've seen in a market that could get a $10 million fine is $3 million. But under the principles of the original privacy principles of Castle and anti-spam, the biggest fine we've seen is $250,000 to Rogers.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, and I agree with everything you said. So it feels like in the new world, exasperated by COVID, although it's important, the fines will be probably pretty meaty under what ends up becoming law out of Bill C-11. But the bigger threat is against your own brand and what the future generations, which aren't so future anymore because they're in the market now, how they think about your brand and willing to embrace your brand for them and their families. Yeah, that's a very prophetic point. And so
I know that you're following the Apple
totally.
position, and Tim Cook's statements this week were absolutely brilliant.
Spot on.
Now, you know, is Apple perfect? No, they're not, Lauren. But the intentions are right, and they're going to change practices. I happen to on the ISO committee. I do sit with the head of privacy for Apple on that committee, and you know, we've talked, and they are looking at every little thing. Now, they've had 20 years of doing what every other business is doing, and just the last few years, they've been since GDPR has come along, they've said, you know, you're right. You're right. We shouldn't be making money this way. We should be respecting consumers. Absolutely. And you're gonna see a huge shift towards Apple for the position they're taking with regard to privacy and social media. And some people think they're picking a fight with Facebook. I don't think they are. I think they're picking a fight with the business community, saying, "Come on, enough. Let's respect people's boundaries, personal." Like
I love right? the leadership stance. I think it's brilliant. So, what do you think about the pirates, the data pirates that we'll call them, the Facebooks of this world? Do you think for them to be able to survive and more around their brand, they're going to have to conform? Like, how else?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So we're starting to see cracks in the dike now in Europe. I just downloaded yesterday a 50-page white paper on real-time bidding and the how it breaks the law under the GDPR. And it was written by some university scholars over in the Netherlands. And I'm just starting to read it, but they're actually pointing to why the data protection authorities must fine Facebook and Google for their practices. And it looks like a pretty legitimate argument. So this affects many areas, Lauren. You know, not only your brand, but you know, how you introduce new products and this whole privacy by design. You know as well as I do, if you're building an online solution, you better have privacy baked into it. Totally. Because if you don't, your business risks both from your consumers' disrespect or rallying against you to the fines that you could get. I would suggest to you the fines shouldn't drive you, but they do. And the private right of action, I think, would have made a big difference. So when the government says that they have strong enforcement, it's what I call political sound bites, Lauren. They have the higher fines than the GDPR. What a great political soundbite! Because the average person listening to that goes, "Oh, it's going to be strongly enforced." The reality, I don't think so. And I think they're going to give us 2 to 3 years to implement against it. But it doesn't mean that business shouldn't start looking now.
Totally. That's why I love what Apple's doing, right? Like they're being proactive and getting on top of it and actually trying to create a world of acceptance, empowerment for consumers, zero party driven, and I think that's
Yep.
powerful. So, Derek, so what would you for businesses, like what do they do now? So if I'm sitting here, I'm listening
Yeah,
to
very good.
this conversation, like what exactly, like where do I start? You know, because it's overwhelming in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I would do is at least get a handle on what data I hold. What do I collect and what do I do with it? So data mapping and understanding what your current practices are is a great start. So at the very least, no matter which way the law goes, Lauren, you should understand that with your company. You should review all of your current practices and measure them. You know, in this case, I would suggest measure them against the GDPR. So create a gap report between what you do today and what the GDPR is asking you to do. Because until we pass a law here in Canada, like why bother measuring it against a moving target, right? GDPR is pretty settled. They just had a 2-year review, which they recommended no changes to the GDPR, which was incredible. They have a very long list of issues that need to be resolved around enforcement. The countries are underfunding the data protection authorities in most of the countries, so they don't have the resources to do what they need to do to enforce the law. So in terms of I would prioritize the gaps that you identify between what your current practices are now and the GDPR, and I would prioritize the biggest problems first. So the really gaping holes, I like, for example, we're collecting a whole bunch of data we never use. Let's stop doing that. Let's put data minimization in place, and let's put some purpose limitations around the data we collect. So let's start thinking about it. Most of my clients over the last 10 years in this space don't have a retention policy. They don't have something that says we need this for 7 years because of tax reasons. It's transactional, so we're going to keep this information for 7 years, but we're going to delete it on the first day of the 8th year, right? They don't have retention policies. So again, just look at what data you're collecting, have a clear handle on it, and have a clear path to how you use it and how it's valuable to driving business outcomes. That data, you're probably not going to get bothered by the laws, and because that kind of data is fundamental to you doing business. But the fact is we keep a lot of data that we never use. Good intentions, I call it. We collect it with good intentions, but we've never put a program in to use it, and we still collect it, and we don't protect it properly. That's a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for real brand damage, because when you get a data breach, the real cost of a data breach is the brand damage, in my opinion. You can get fined and all that with data breaches, and you can actually get sued under the private right of action, and even in the U.S. But the fact is that the biggest cost is to the brand's reputation. So the other thing that any law that gets passed here is going to require every company to have a privacy management program. You know, for companies like me, we should be here salivating, but I'm not. I'm really not. I would love to come up with a very easy peasy program that people could adopt and put into their company with the least amount of effort, but with the most amount of meaning. It's going to be a challenge, but every company is going to have a privacy management program in place with documented manuals and staff trained and all the components that come with a compliance program. So you may as well start down that road now, because whatever they do, that's going to be one of the requirements.
Yeah, it's a great comment. So again, I'm in the current situation now. I'm a marketer. I've been with my brand, let's say, for 5 or 6 years. I've been listening to this stuff about Bill C-11. I'm kind of clued into PIPEDA. I probably understand probably the best law is probably around Castle, like what to do regarding email. Is the starting point, like, how do I even understand GDPR? Like, is there an easy peasy review cheat sheet on GDPR that someone could map against their current practices? Like, where do they start? Do they have to go to their in-house legal counsel? Or are they best to reach out to a practitioner like you? Being unbiased here, like, what's the best, like, objective approach? What's the best recommendation or counsel that you can give somebody in that position today?
Yeah, if they're not familiar with the laws, they really need to find somebody who it is, so that when they do that gap report, they're doing it against reality rather than perceptions. Because there's been a whole bunch of misperceptions around the GDPR, like that it's a consent-based regime. It's not. It's not. You can send emails for commercial purposes in the EU on an opt-out basis. Like, they're way less stringent about sending emails under the GDPR.
You can keep sending until somebody opts out.
Exactly. They just ask that you have an working unsubscribe,
Yeah,
and when
that's
somebody
fair.
wants out, you let them out, right? So when they say stop, stop. It's an opt-out regime. It's not an opt-in regime. Canada's the toughest. Canada and Australia are two of the toughest, and there's spots in the EU, like Germany. Prior to the GDPR, Germany had a pretty tough consent-based regime. They were not opt-out. So one of the things that they've compromised on to be part of the EU and the GDPR is they've lessened the rules. But the German companies, quite frankly, are in the habit of asking for consent because of the prior German regime. So it's just good practices on behalf of the company, right? I think most companies, though, in Canada, they actually don't realize how offside their practices are. Just because it's been invisible to us, Lauren. I like to put it this way. Instead of doing, we took our cue from what technology enabled us to do, rather than should we do it. You understand what I mean? Like, we base the decision on the wrong element, the wrong foundation.
Yeah.
And I think if all the way along we've been saying, like, okay, I get the technology lets me do this, but should we be doing this? Like, would our customers like this? Yeah. And somehow marketing got, knocked off track in the last 15 years and stopped going, well, wait a minute, what about our customer? And marketing is the last bastion between the organization and its customer. And I think we went quiet. And I think it's cost us dearly. And it's part of why we're in the mess we're in today and need these new data protection and privacy laws. And I don't think there's anybody in the world who can make an argument that these laws aren't required, because we've just completely misbehaved as a business community. And I think it's time to put some correction in.
So if you were to put timing around, if we get back to even Bill C-11, like, what would be your best guess on whatever this new law ends up morphing into, of it being in market and enforced? Are we talking a year and a half, 2 years, 6 months? So you said second reading presently, right? Like, what's the typical number of readings for a bill like this? Or maybe there's not a typical, and there's political strings all over the place, I know.
Yeah, no, they're on process. So the second reading is what's required, and at that point they can kick it up to the ethics committee for public consultation. These kinds of bills, Castle went to the INDU committee which is the business committee. They feel that the privacy is more under the ethics committee in terms of ethics in doing business. So that's why the ethics committee has had privacy responsibilities over the years. So that's why they're kicking it to the ethics committee. It's not to distract them from we. I'm sure that the ethics committee is sophisticated enough to walk and chew gum at the same time, and have two investigations going on, or two, more than one thing happening. right? And I'm sure they're not one-dimensional. So, um, uh, sorry, I'm going to circle back and ask you to reframe that question because it was a good one.
Yeah, I was just wondering on timing, because some
Yeah,
of these bills
timing,
that
right?
are out there, they seem like they just float forever. Do you think, first of all, it'll be consummated into law? And then secondly, what's your best guess on timing and how enforceable will it be? I guess those are the three parts of the question.
Uh, I believe as it's currently written, it will not become law. It will morph a great deal between now and then. I would suggest with elections looming and stuff, we're not going to see attention paid to this file this year. So I would not hold my breath on this law being passed this year. The FE committee process is significant. They listen to everybody who's willing to stand before them. And again, we will have a plan with the Response Marketing Association to take the specific issues, and make specific recommendations for change. I look forward to participating in that process. To answer your question, it could be 3 or 4 years, which is awesome because it gives business. They know what the smell is coming from the kitchen, right? We can see it now, so you can start to look at your practices, and like I said earlier, it starts with doing an assessment, like a data mapping process of all the data you keep and touch, and what you do with it, who you share it with, all of that. Do an analysis of what's so now, so that you can start to prepare and move towards compliance with the global standards, and then tweak it when it finally becomes law. Tweak it against the law.
And Derek, in your mind, for businesses and for marketers, is that a big deal? Like the data mapping exercise, is it? Nothing's easy these days, as you well know, but is it something that, fundamentally, if you just ask the right questions, what data do I need? How am I using it? How do I think I'll use it? What's my intended use? Is it a relatively simple exercise?
Depends on the company, Lauren. So, we've done work for new apps who their data is concentrated. Pretty simple process, right? You can literally look field by field. What do we capture? You can categorize them. And then you can decide across the spreadsheet what you do with it, how long you keep it, purpose limitations of, what you can and can't do with that data. You do all that thinking, right? So it's a pretty simple process for a centralized company's got centralized data. For a company like Rogers, who have it all over the place, multi-divisions who don't always work with each other, they're kind of like this. So in a big company, it could be a nightmare. To do a complete data mapping on a company like Rogers would be a major task. And I know they have a very large privacy team led by Deb Evans, who's very competent. I'm sure they're getting a handle or have a handle on all the data they do and don't collect from all the divisions, but it's not without a lot of work and effort.
I guess in a lot of ways, my words, not anybody else's, it's sort of pay me now or pay me later, right? You've got to get on it.
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
You have to do it anyway, so you may as well get on top of it.
The train's coming.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally. And what do you think? Last question that I had anyway. This has been very informative. I know you said the size of the fines in Canada historically. We make innuendos around the penalties here are greater than they are in the GDPR. Do you think from the fine standpoint, the enforcement standpoint, do you think it'll be similar to what's been in the past, that we'll still have overtures around these huge fines, but in fact, we're not really going to whack people really hard anyway? Or do you think that sentiment's even changing as consumers become more diligent and more aware of what's transpiring?
Yeah, I think you're going to see, particularly in data breaches, Lauren, I think you're going to see some very stiff fines when this law gets put in place. So that if you're going to collect people and use people's personal data, you now must secure it. And there has to be at least a reasonable effort to secure it. And if there's not, you're going to see some pretty stiff fines for it. So I think that's the number one thing that's going to get fined under this new law. The second thing is not being able to prove consent. But again, a good lawyer can take those 33 exemptions and really, really turn a conversation inside out pretty quickly.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting. I hope that the conservatives and the other parties see the wisdom of, you know, rethinking the way this bill is written, and maybe leaning more on a legitimate processing options, because under legitimate interest in the GDPR, you can conduct business. That's the whole category of legitimate interest, is to allow business to carry on, but don't take advantage of people's personal data without their consent.
Seems reasonable.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, it's mind-boggling that we're here.
Totally.
Right.
Like intuitively, it passes the sniff test, right? Yeah,
right.
I totally agree. Well, this has been great, Derek. Thank you. I know we're out of time. Again, as I always say, I wish we had more time, because it's such a deep topic and such a profound topic in terms of how it's going to impact marketers and businesses. So I think this was really well time spent. So thank you. So again, special thank to Chairman of the RMA, Derek Lackey, and Managing Director for Newport Thompson. Really appreciate your time and interest, and to everybody else who tuned in. Again, special thanks to the RMA for sponsoring this, and we look forward to many more Think and Disrupt sessions. So on that note, have a great day, Derek. Thanks for your help. Stay healthy, and to everybody else, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Lauren.
Take it easy.